How's it going everyone? I hope you're all doing good. Welcome to this study session in which we are going to be looking at the eyes. Now in the previous video I had looked at the muscles of the face and head, and initially I was intending on moving on to the neck and looking at the muscles there, but after giving it some thought I've decided that it's probably worthwhile to slow down a little and spend some more time really learning about the head and the face, right? I mean, after all, I want to learn how to draw this stuff and ideally be able to draw it from my imagination, so for the next few videos we'll be doing just that. So on screen here you can see that I'm drawing out an eye, and the reason I'm doing this is so that we can start talking about structure. We need to understand the eye before we can draw it. Some of you probably already know that the small circle in the centre of the eye is the pupil, and without getting too technical, when it's dark your pupils get bigger in order to let more light in, and the same thing happens when you stare at an object of interest. The size of the pupils can have a big effect on a person's appearance when drawing. Around the pupil is the iris, often varying in colour between different people. There is the upper eyelid wrapping over the top of the eyeball, and there's also the lower eyelid wrapping around the bottom of the eyeball. Oh, and there's also the eyeball itself, and at the inside of the eye, towards the nose, there is what is called the lacrimal caruncle. There's also the eyelashes. So that's everything we need to be aware of. I also want to point out the sparkle in the eye caused by light reflecting off of the iris. Most of the time when you look at an eye, you'll see some light reflecting off of it, which can obviously change depending on the size and the direction of the light, but when drawing it's something to consider. Now below this, I'll draw something that illustrates another important point that I want to make before we start looking at all of these features more in depth. Here is a section of a skull on a front and side view, and the eyeball sits within the eye sockets of the skull. Notice as well how the eye sockets are not circular, as you might assume. They are more like a rounded rectangle. This is to create the space for all of the muscles that connect to the eye. Muscles that we don't need to know about because they are hidden inside. I'll draw in the eyeball here so that you can see it sitting in its eye socket. Now, another assumption you might make is that the eyeball is a perfectly round ball, but it actually pops out a little at the front. Over the iris is what is called the cornea. Think of this like a contact lens. Once the eyelids are added over this, which remember from the last video is part of the orbicularis oculi muscles, the overall shape of the eye is more diamond in shape rather than circular. We'll be drawing the eyes onto the skull later in this video. So that's the structure of the eye. Now I'm going to try and approach this in a somewhat step-by-step fashion to cover all of these features, and I want to start with the eyelids because these are probably the most important thing to get right when drawing the eye. I want to show you a page from Gottfried Barms's book. Here you can see how he illustrates the eyelids wrapping over the eyeballs, and this is something that I'm going to keep in mind here as I start to sketch out some eyes. Also, some of you might have heard of the Asaro head. This is a model of a head that was created in 1976 by a man named John Asaro to help understand the planes of the head, and we'll be referring to this often throughout these study sessions. However, I also found this to be a good reference when it came to drawing these eyes and eyelids that wrap over the eyeballs. The head is obviously planar, with sharp edges that help to see how light casts shadows on the face. Now, with my little sketches here, I made these more curved as I wanted to have these eyelids travelling over what is a round eyeball. As I draw out a handful of these on different angles, you can see how each of these eyelids are divided into two planes. They actually have some thickness to them, which does well to emphasise their forms. This is a little exaggerated though. These examples are similar to the ones I had shown by Barms, in which he illustrates how the eyelids surround the eyeball. One advantage in drawing these planes is that it helps to define the angle at which you are viewing the eye. You'll see here when I draw an eye from above with the eye looking down, how the bottom plane, the underside of the upper eyelid, and the bottom plane of the lower eyelid is no longer visible. Instead, we only see the top of these eyelids. The arc I draw around the top of these also helps to define the angle these are being viewed on. This is the outer edge of the eye socket, edges that are seen when looking at the Asaro head. Now, I will be drawing more eyes soon. For now, I want to discuss a few anatomical differences when it comes to eyelids and how they differ between Eastern and Western people. Now, one difference that Cynics mentioned in his Anatomy Quick Tips video, which I recommend watching, was how Western eyes seem to be more sunken into the eye sockets, whereas many Asian ethnicities have eyes that are not sunken into the skull as much. Eastern eyes seem to look rounder and have thicker eyelids, whereas Western eyes have more folds due to thinner and looser skin. Also, in regards to eyelids, there is one strongly defined characteristic of Eastern eyes which is referred to as the epicanthal fold, and you can see it here in this drawing. This is when part of the upper eyelid folds down and covers the inner corner of the eye. The bottom lid on the Eastern eye also seems to protrude more, looking more puffier in comparison to Western eyes. Those are some standout differences to keep in mind when drawing the eyes. Now, what next? Well, we've got to briefly talk about eyelashes, right? Because none of the eyes I have drawn on this page have any, but here I'll turn over to a new page to look at this. On a front view, although you can still see them, eyelashes might not be as obvious, and depending on the drawing, you might want to reduce them a little. On a side view, you'll notice that the eyelashes on the upper lid curve out and upwards slightly, and the eyelashes on the lower lid curve downwards. When I was looking through all of my books to see how other artists approached drawing the eyes, one thing I noticed was that most of the time they didn't draw the eyelashes. And I think this is because, with the exception of hyperrealism, most of the time these small details can be left out or at least reduced down, right? I personally find eyelashes annoying, not in real life because we need them, but when it comes to drawing them, they can often look weird, like little spider legs coming off of the eye. A lot of the examples I was looking at focused on structure and the forms of the eye. And so, in a way, eyelashes are just smaller details you can add if you feel the need to, but I had to give them an honourable mention. Just when you do draw them, don't draw them like this. So now in these final examples, I'm going to do something a lot of people don't do when looking at how to draw the eyes. I'm going to draw them in pairs because you probably already know that we have two eyes that sit at either side of the face. And in some regard, it's not that useful to just draw one eye by itself when most of the time you'll be drawing two when drawing faces, unless you're drawing a cyclops. Now, I'm also going to have a go at placing them on the skull, because that's some important context. As I said, I want to start adding the facial features to the skull as I cover them. So here I'll start with a front view, and I'll slow down a little here so I can talk through this. Firstly, I need to draw a skull. Fortunately, I covered how to easily draw the skull in a separate study session. Now you will know if you've watched that video that the skull can be divided into 3 equal sections, 2 of these being either half of this circle and then another one down below, like so. There's also some further divisions you can make that helps place the various features of the skull, so here I do that, and you'll see how I use these guidelines to outline a simple skull. I don't want to add too much detail here because, again, the skull is not the subject of this study session. So I have my skull now, and you can see that I've drawn these rounded rectangular eye sockets. Now within these we have the eyeballs, so that's what I'll add first, 2 circles that almost fill the eye sockets. I'll also draw a circle for the iris in the centre of these. Okay, now here I start to outline the eyelids around the iris to create that diamond shape. Our skull looks very shifty now, like it's up to something. Now again, using the Asaro head as reference, I'll start drawing out the lower lids. On a front view like this, we'll see that top plane angled down slightly, along with the lower section wrapping around. Notice how it reduces in size and seems to flick outwards on the inside where that lacrimal caruncle is. I like saying that word. Now I'll do the same for the upper lid, drawing out that plane on the underside first and then adding that curved section above over it. Okay, now there's one important thing to do here that will really finish off these eyes that we are adding to this skull and help define the angle at which we are viewing this on. If you look at the upper edge of the eye sockets on the Asaro skull, this is a hard edge which protrudes as the eye sockets sink into the head, and it's an important line to define. Finally, I'll add some shading to this, and I'll even give these eyes some pupils. So that's the front view, and I'm going to do a few more of these. This next one I'll draw on like a 3/4 view. Again, I've got my perfect circle to start drawing the skull. Notice how my dividing lines this time wrap around what is essentially a sphere, right? The front was easy because it's all flat, being a circle, but here we are dealing with three-dimensional forms. The same method still applies though. I make the same divisions and draw out this skull. Alright, now we have another skull that needs some eyes. Here I'll draw in the eyeballs, and I'm going to draw the full circle for the eyeball on the right hand side, even though we wouldn't see half of it due to the angle we are viewing this on. Also, when I start to cover the other features and draw the nose, that would obstruct our view on some angles when we look at the eyes, but here there is no nose to worry about. So I've got my balls drawn in. That sounded weird, but I'll do the same again and start by drawing in what I guess is the inner edge of the eyelids, right, to create these diamond shapes. Now I'll add the lower lid, and as I do this I have to consider the angle I'm drawing this on. Again, I'm wrapping these forms around these eyeballs, which are again spheres. Now I'll draw in the upper lids. And so again, I'm going to define this upper edge of the eye socket, and I shade this in because a lot of the time, because these eye sockets are sunken into the head, there is a shadow here. That depends on the direction of light, obviously. So for another example, I think it will be good to look at this from a lower down view on an angle at which we are looking up at the skull. In terms of drawing the skull on these angles, it gets quite tricky, but I'll see what I can do here. On angles like this, the features seem to shift upwards slightly, and that's where it becomes challenging because you can't just blindly take the same approach as we did in the other two examples. Okay, so we've got another skull, this time from a different angle, and as always I'll start by drawing in two eyeballs. Notice here how I have them lower down towards that lower edge of the eye socket. Because of the angle we are viewing this on, we'd see more of the underside of the top of the eye socket. I'll add what is going to be an ellipse onto these eyeballs for the iris. I can't just draw flat circles here, I need to have these laid over the spheres. Again, always try and consider these forms. I'll now draw in the inner edge of the eyelids, the diamond, and then I'll draw in the lower lids. Now this time we'd only see a very small sliver of that top plane. On the Asaro head, this plane angles downwards. In some cases where you are looking up at the face on a more drastic angle, you wouldn't see this top plane at all. We do, however, see a lot of that bottom plane, and the same goes for the upper lid. We'll see a lot of that bottom plane on the underside, but not as much of the top plane. We will see the side of it wrapping up and over though. As I emphasise the top edge of the eye socket, you see how important it is on an angle like this. It really helps to plant the eyes into the skull. Okay, so that's a few examples of eyes drawn on the skull, and you will see me draw a lot more of these as I progress with these videos. For now, I'm going to end this one here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like. As always, I will be making a study document to go alongside this on Patreon, so check that out if you want to learn more. With that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the content I create, then do consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You will gain access to exclusive tutorials, study documents, process papers, real-time drawing footage and more. Plus, you will also be supporting me in a more personal way. Other than that, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you soon.